Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness. Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Encounter. I'm Jeff Kellam, your host today. I serve as the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. Almost Heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. John Denver's song, Country Roads, almost became the theme song, I guess, of West Virginia. And that idea of almost heaven and the Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Actually, the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah River are mostly in Virginia. I want to make that clear as a former Virginian. But, you know, Western Virginia, West Virginia, Western North Carolina, Western Pennsylvania, we think of that as being Appalachia. Little did I realize that I grew up in Appalachia until maybe almost seminary. And here we are in the Twin Tiers, a part of Appalachia. And that's what apparently led Dr. Joseph Sellepack, the executive director of the Broome County Council of Churches, to attend the Appalachian Leadership Institute. I have it here on my phone. It says it's a leadership training opportunity that equips Appalachian community leaders to use economic development as a tool to drive positive change. Designed for people who live and or work in Appalachia and are compassionate about helping their communities thrive. And it goes on from there. And we're going to go on from there by talking to Joe Sellepack about his becoming a fellow of the Appalachian Leadership Institute, which is sponsored by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Did I get all of that fairly right?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Yeah, the Appalachian, even the way that you're pronouncing it, because of course, we have a town in our area called Appalachian.
Yes.
And everyone wants to make sure that you get the strong CH in there for Appalachian. But they actually did an entire like 20 minutes on how to pronounce Appalachian.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so as a result of that, you know, because we call it up north the Appalachian Trail. Yes. But down south, everyone will talk about it as being Appalachian, and they wanted to make sure that we understood that that's the proper pronunciation of Appalachian. Right. And it was kind of interesting. As you indicated, you know, the idea that New York is part of the Appalachian mountain chain. The Appalachian mountain chain actually goes much further north than New York. It goes all the way up to Maine, comes down through the Green Mountains, are part of the Appalachian Trail, or the Appalachian mountain chain, as well as the Catskills. And in a way, the Appalachian Regional Commission kind of mirrors the mountains that you spoke about, like you have the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Great Smoky Mountains, going all the way down into Georgia, where that is. But there's also a real cultural component to it that you don't necessarily think about. Which is why it would include things like places like Mississippi, Alabama, and other places in the South where even though they aren't part of the mountain chain, they still are very much attached to the Appalachian way of life, which kind of is encompassed by, you know, the relationship between people and the land. Mm-hmm. And also family enters into that discussion, as well as, you know, the problems when you're in one of the biggest economic problems that kind of emerges when you think about the Appalachian mountain chain is that you have all of these small towns that are disconnected from each other because of the mountains. Mm-hmm. And so you have road issues, you have utility issues that come in as a result of that, you have Wi-Fi issues, you have power issues, like how are we going to get power to all these small towns? And then on top of that, how do we deal with some of the economic issues that are part of Appalachia, with increasing poverty, little hollows of people where they've lived in hollows forever, and they've transferred land from one generation to the next, but they're currently living in housing that is substandard. And how do we then deal with those issues? And so as a result, the Appalachian Leadership Institute has tried to do some work at trying to help people understand some of the economic problems that are in the Appalachian region, as well as some ways that we can work together to solve some of those issues.
It is interesting that when we think of Appalachia, we think of rural communities.
Right.
And certainly we have our rural areas in the Twin Tiers.
Right.
But it's so easy to stereotype it into a certain section.
Right.
The backwoods and so on. But this is an economic belt almost that goes from Mississippi up into Maine.
Right.
That's distinct somehow from the other economic areas of the U.S. What led you to, how did you find out about the Leadership Institute to begin with?
So when we opened the grocery store,
that would be the Greater Good
Grocery Store that we opened with the Broome County Council of Churches on the north side of Binghamton. One of the places where we went to for funds was with the Appalachian Regional Commission. And we secured that. It took a long time. It was a highly competitive grant that we had to write in order to get those funds. But and also it kind of propelled some of the purposes for the grocery store. So we had to connect a grocery store with the economic issues within the north side of Binghamton. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, we had to show how it would help with property values on the north side of Binghamton, how it would be a job creator for the area, how many people we're hoping to employ from the Greater Good Grocery, and how many people can we train in retail and in and as well as we connected that part of it with chow and warehousing and other kinds of stuff like that. So yeah. It was like, we had to do a job training program. It was a pretty big undertaking, and it was after us being selected for that I got the announcement from the Appalachian Regional Commission about being a fellow, and I said, well, that looks good. I haven't done some continuing ed in a while. Yeah. And so I applied. I thought, well, if I have to go up against the best of all the, if you think about that span, it goes all the way from Alabama, Mississippi, all the way up to here, where we're the northern part of the Appalachian Regional Commission. After this, it goes into something dealing with New England, and so there's a different group of that right, areas right. of the Appalachian Mountain chain is connected to. But we're on the northern ring, and so I'm thinking to myself, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens, and if I can get in, and sure enough, I did. It was.
And how many people get in?
40 in that per year. That's how many are in the cohort. And so here's a picture that just came up on the screen of the cohort that I was a part of, and this was at our graduation. There were 40 people there were 4 of us from New York that were a part of that, as well as people from Maryland, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi. I roomed with a guy from Mississippi who is a at the time, he was a staffer for one of the Republican senators from the state of Mississippi.
Were there any language issues you had to worry about with your roommate?
Well, it was interesting because we both like to talk, and so it was like we would be staying up rather late at that point, and it was like he was a very interesting guy, and it broke down a lot of the barriers that I had thought about Republicans in general, and he and I found out that we share a lot of the same passions, including making sure that there's enough food for children. Yeah. Which is something that I've always thought was part of, very very close to my heart. And it's one of the reasons that I'm incredibly passionate about the work that we do here at the council.
And see, that in itself is just breaking down the borders and boundaries, the barriers, and discovering that people on different sides of different issues still have some things in common. And man, if we can get politicians to think more about the common issues that we're trying to face and less about party issues, how refreshing that would be.
Yeah, and it really did that. I mean, one of the people that was involved with the group, he and I come from we not only were we different sides politically, like I am a Democrat as far as like what party I support. He is a Republican, what he calls mayor inside of the state of Tennessee, which for us is a county executive. They're county mayors, and the mayor and he was a Republican, but yet when you looked at the two of us, he was a couple years younger than me, but he and I kind of looked like mirror images of each other because we wore the same clothing. We had, we both had those kind of dress shoes that kind of like look like sneakers too. And so we were, and then we both like to do barbecue. We both have, it was like one thing after the other that we both share. We're both religious people, and he's looking at me going, why are you the way that you are? And I go, well, because in New York, if you don't register with the Democratic Party, you really don't get to vote for governor. And I said, if you ask me about my politics, I'm far more independent than one or the other, like for me. And he said, well, that's kind of like how I feel being in Tennessee. That we end up having to do the same thing there, where in order for us to either get elected or be involved in something, we have to align with the Republican Party, even though not everything that the Republican Party stands for, he stands for himself. And so you find when you get beyond this binary discussion, you find that there's much more deeper understanding of what it means to be a human being, as well as what it means to be a leader inside of these communities. Now,
you refer to this as a class, but this was not just a 3-day event.
No.
Tell me about the structure of this leadership training that you went through.
So it started in West Virginia. We ended up going, that's where I had a roommate. We had cabins, and we were part of like the group there, and there was a retreat center that we went to in West Virginia. It's funny that you brought up the John Denver song about Almost Heaven.
Yeah.
That was one that was repeated almost every session all the way through this whole thing. So it started off in West Virginia, and then we ended up, we were there for a week. And then after that, we went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and then we went to Rome, Georgia. We were in Tupelo, Mississippi, then Berea, Kentucky, Erie, Pennsylvania, and then Washington, D.C. So there were 7 sessions. I must be missing one, but anyway,
not all at once though.
No,
no.
They were spread over 9 months.
Yeah.
So we were at these various places, and actually the regional commission picked up the tab for all the travel that was involved in it, and most of the meals that we had, there were a couple of meals that we were responsible for ourselves, but right. It was one of those things where there was a reading requirement that kind of went along with it. So I read 6 books, one on the development of Appalachia, and in the history as well as the economic issues in Appalachia, another one on brain drain, where you end up with people that are moving out of Appalachia because there are opportunities elsewhere that they don't have in Appalachia, and why that is, and how we can kind of help reduce the amount of people that are leaving, and actually even educate the people that remain, that are part of it. That was an interesting discussion. But there's all, each place that we went to had a different theme. So we had tourism, we did infrastructure, we talked about, the infrastructure one was really interesting because we ended up at a waste treatment facility. I've never really thought about how our waste is handled, but yeah. It was kind of interesting to see the science behind it, as well as the complicated issues that are involved in waste treatment. But it's an essential part of infrastructure, as well as water and electrical lights and electricity, and making sure that we have the power. Wi-Fi is increasingly becoming an issue where people need to have connections, not Wi-Fi, but internet connections, so that we can connect to the World Wide Web and be able to do business remotely, that kind of thing. So it was enlightening, and each place had its own theme, and you got to see all these places. Like I had never thought that I would ever be in Tupelo.
Right.
Right. But there I am, and I find out that this is where Elvis was born, and then you get to go through the downtown area and see what Tupelo looks like, and all the various things that they've done in order to make Tupelo a thriving place. And Tupelo is is an incredibly great. It's a beautiful story of how people can work together in order to make their area a much better place. And Tupelo's done a lot of business in attracting Toyota. There's been a number of growth areas of growth that Tupelo's enjoyed. And so it was kind of interesting to be in these little towns that are very similar to Binghamton. They have similar populations. There are similar problems that we're all facing, and then you begin to understand that that part of what we're all dealing with is the nostalgia over what we have in the past, versus the reality that we have in the present and what we need in order to thrive economically in the future.
And this is something that certainly we identify with in the Triple Cities area,
right,
with the shoe company and IBM, with the EJ factories and so on. We think of the closing of the coal mines. We think of the shutting down of oil mill drilling and so on in Pennsylvania. And life changes as we've entered the 21st century. The issues are different, but what remains the same is the poverty that is being addressed by the Appalachian Leadership Institute, which is kind of our topic today. Our guest is Joe Sellepack, who is a fellow now in this Leadership Institute. So what have you gotten out of this that will change the way you direct the work of the Council of Churches?
So one of the big things that we've been working at the council really has had to do with job creation, and then connecting it to a larger story of the area. We really have had to work at developing different kinds of relationships. So currently one of our relationships is with BOCES, which does a lot of work at trying to integrate students into careers. And so we've through that relationship with BOCES, we've talked a lot about how do we train young people in the kind of work that we're looking at, and how do we then help those young people develop a resume so that they can get other jobs in the future. And so those have been some of the things that we've been dealing with, that especially through CHAL. That's a big part of CHAL's mission, as well as the Greater Good Grocery. And then part of the other issue is that when we're doing these job creation, job training, and economic improvement projects, connecting them across state boundaries with other places that are dealing with some of the same issues. And so what it'll do for us ultimately is get us involved in conversations with similar areas in like Rome, Georgia, or in like Tupelo or other places where they're dealing with some of the same problems that we are, and we can all apply for larger grants that would kind of overarch some of the various projects that kind of go on in these areas. And so we're looking at how we develop those relationships, which makes those applications easier.
Yeah, we often tend to think of things as either being national or local, but this is a regional stretch,
right,
of folks who have a lot in common, whether they're in an industrial area or a rural area where folks have struggled to find work and meaning in their lives.
And if you look at the way that rural poverty and urban poverty, they kind of mirror each other. They speak past each other a lot of times. So you have like the drug issues, or and people in the rural communities, they'll say, well, you've got crack cocaine inside of that's kind of their if you remember back in the 80s and 90s, that was the generalization that was offered. You got crack cocaine inside of but then they have meth in the more rural communities where there's that stereotype as well, and they're all dealing with an opioid epidemic. I can't tell you how many sessions that subject came up, like how do we deal with the opioid issues and the effects that the opioid issues are having on the workforce in general.
Wow.
And it's becoming a big problem, and not only that, you end up with people who have been released from jail needing to get back to reintegrate within communities, and that is a huge part that could be a huge part of the workforce too. And there's a lot of federal money that's attached to people trying to hire folks who have been previously incarcerated and are trying to find a different start. And what they carry with them is, again, all the baggage that kind of comes along with that. You've been convicted or of a felony, or you've had these strikes that are all against you, and therefore you don't have a good enough track record in order to be involved in the workforce. But each one of these communities that we went to, they're all dealing with the opioid issue, the jail reentry issues, and how do we employ people, get enough workers. Actually, at the time, they're still struggling with trying to find the right workers, and what the argument against people who were previously incarcerated is generally that they're shiftless, they're not serious about work. There's a whole number of things that kind of go along with that, and yet each one of those are a myth. When you start looking at the actual results of people who have been previously incarcerated, they are more dedicated to work. They are they are less likely to be addicted to drugs. There's a whole number of things that kind of go along with that are not typical.
Yeah.
And we break. You have to break down through the use of data and the use of the real facts of the issue against the anecdotes that we've all lived under. And it's a hard thing.
Yeah, we have presuppositions and we have myth, but sometimes fact, or truth with a capital T, is harder for us to grasp or to learn about.
Right.
Now, the Appalachian Leadership Institute invested a lot in your class of 40.
Yeah.
What is your responsibility now with 2.5 minutes left? What is your responsibility now to them? Is there a continuing relationship?
So they have an alumni association similar to the alumni association that you would have at a college or seminary or something.
Game and dance.
And then there's so all these alumni gatherings are spread throughout the region. They just recently had an alumni gathering in Asheville, North Carolina.
And this is reinforcement, isn't it?
It's just reinforcement and trying to build relationships with other people who have graduated who are in your area or in. So if you're thinking about it, the likelihood of me going into a relationship with someone from Tupelo would have to be just because I know that person from Tupelo, and maybe he'll introduce me to somebody else from Mississippi or Alabama and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And so, I may end up going to some of those in the South, but the majority of the ones that I'll be going to are like in Erie or Maryland or Pennsylvania or other places that are around, that are in our general area, and that would be part of that.
Yeah. So to find out more about the Appalachian Leadership Institute, you can simply Google that, and the website will come up. That's what I did last night in preparation for talking with you about it.
And you can also find out more about the Appalachian Regional Commission just by looking up the Regional Commission as well.
That's
they do
the
a lot
of the Institute.
They do a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had that experience, and I'm glad that you're not only a great person, but you're a fellow.
I am a fellow.
You're now a fellow. So I hope someday I grow up to be a fellow too. We want to thank you for joining us with this conversation with Dr. Joseph Sellepack, the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches, about becoming a fellow of the Appalachian Leadership Institute. And I want to thank you for joining us for Encounter, with our thanks to WBNG TV for the production facilities and Chris Miller in the booth pushing the buttons, and also to the Town Square media stations for playing the audio portion of this program. I'm Jeff Kellam from the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, hoping that in the coming week you will be gentle with people and with yourself.